So this last panel is all about climate change in the mainstream, and it's basically to do with the fact that often climate change can become a bit of a side interest, or you can get an hour in geography in school once a month sort of thing. It's not a main topic for a lot of people, and we want to talk today about how it can be part of your life and how we can be really connected to nature and to changes and to the environment and science and all of that world. So please help me welcome our lovely panelists. So to start off with, guys, I'm going to get you all to introduce yourselves, talk about what you do, what your work is in this space. Let's start with you, Kateka.
Wah. That's a traditional greeting from the Lani tribe, which is where I'm from. I'm from the island of New Guinea. It's an island north of Australia, just 250 kilometers. And I am the spokesperson for the Free West Papua campaign UK, based in Oxford. This is my first time at the Eden Project, and I'm really excited to be talking about decolonization, indigenous knowledge within the climate justice space, and sharing with you an exciting vision brought to you today. Yeah, that's me.
Rianka?
Hello, I'm Rianka. I'm a climate justice activist based in London. I have flitted around various groups over the last kind of 5 years. Today I'm representing Climate Live, and I'm here to talk to you about music and climate.
Hi everyone, my name's Camilla. I work at the Natural History Museum in London. I've been there about 9 years, and I would say working at that museum has honestly changed the way I see the natural world. It's really helped me fall in love with the planet, and I'll always be very grateful for that. And today I'm just going to speak a little bit about how the museum is really trying to engage people with the planetary emergency, including the climate crisis, and how we've been collaborating with some amazing young people to make that happen. Pleasure to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm Joycelyn. I run Climate in Colour, which is an online education platform making climate conversations more diverse and accessible. And I also am a current PhD student looking at conservation technology and how we can make it more just, specifically with communities in Ghana. So I'll be talking about the differences between Western and sort of global South engagement with the natural world and how this might influence our activism.
Hi guys, my name's Elliot. I am the founder and co-director of a non-profit organization called Football for Future, where we specialize in football and climate action and sustainability. I've got a background in the environmental sciences and social movements, specifically movement building. I've been working in the climate movement for a while, in different ways, in different spaces with a couple of different organizations, which I'm sure many of you have also been associated with, and I am a Brighton fan.
I think you wanted some sympathy there because they lost today, but there you go. Okay, so we've got a very varied panel, lots of different aspects. So I want to start with you, Joycelyn. Thinking about your work with Ghanaian communities and forest communities, why do you think there are barriers to connection with nature on the Western side, and what do you think we could do to overcome those?
I think there are a few reasons. One main one would be access. So the UK is in the bottom 10 least biodiverse countries in the world, and so the amount of access that the average person has to the natural world is super limited, and we also are a country that has suffered in the hands of enclosures, so much of the natural world is owned by so little of the population. So that would be one reason. But the others is, I think, more of a spiritual disconnection with the natural world. I guess from engaging with the community that I work with, the natural world isn't seen as a separate place to go to or to travel to. It's seen as a place that is part of the home, part of daily life, because it is. People are subsisting off of that land. And there seems to be a sort of ingrained communal responsibility for that land, whereas I feel like in the UK, if you don't have a good connection to, say, a local woodland or a local field or somewhere that you feel really connected to, it's seen as somebody else's job to protect that land or to engage with that land, rather than there being an innate, like every person having an innate feeling of responsibility or even power to change or engage with natural spaces more than just walking through them. So yeah, that'd be my first comments.
Is there anything that you have come across or any ideas of how we could overcome that and help people feel a bit more connected?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many great organisations. Like, I'm sure you've probably heard from them today. Like, I know Lyra was here earlier on, and Flock Together, and so many groups like Black Girls Hike, like so many groups who are trying to get people out into the natural world on their terms, like not on the terms of the elite classes or ruling classes, but just to enjoy themselves as a community and to kind of transcend the identities that are usually associated with nature engagement, which often don't feel like they represent certain communities, especially black and brown communities. And so, hi, there's Lyra. So yeah, I think there's lots of people who are actually showing that engaging with the natural world transcends whatever identity you feel like you have to have, and that you can come as yourself and be in the natural world without the baggage of having to have the best clothes or like the best hiking boots or to be of some sort of certain class. So those people are doing really great work.
Okay, amazing. We'll come back to you in a bit. That brings me on to you, Kateko, because I'd love to talk a bit about what role does Indigenous knowledge play in the climate conversation? We've spoken a bit today about science, the role of science and the role of young people as leaders, but I'd love to know what role do you think the Indigenous conversation should have?
So during the introduction, I mentioned that I'm from the Lani tribe. The Lani tribe, we are mountain people. We are the indigenous people. We are one of 250 tribes in out on the island of New Guinea, the western half, West Papua. And West Papua is home to the world's third largest rainforest. And that's really important to keep in mind when thinking about, the hotspots of the world that we need to protect and preserve. I think indigenous knowledge is crucial, particularly when it comes to solutions. So whenever you hear the word indigenous, it's so easy to think of, romantic tribal people running around singing chants around a fire. And that's often what you see in mainstream media. But visibility and humanizing indigenous people and our holistic way of living and existing, it's important because for too long, the microphone just doesn't get handed to indigenous youths, for example. How we live our lives. I'm indigenous, but I live away from my motherland. I've lived in the UK for about 20 years, but I still practice and I still understand the importance of cultural resistance, particularly in a globalizing world. But through that, reclaiming of my culture, I learned that the West and other societies can learn so much about sustainability, about community, about appreciating nature in its fullest. We have a interconnectedness. We realize that we don't just, exist on land, we exist with land. Our rivers, our mountains, our forests, our supermarkets, there are medicine cabinets, there are, our wardrobe. So indigenous knowledge is vital. And so I mentioned I'm the spokesperson of the Free West Papua campaign. And like I said, so I think historically indigenous knowledge and wisdoms have been ignored in academia or in conferences, in high-end places. And I think that's as a result of racism and historical colonial legacies. When it comes to climate justice space, we don't talk about decolonialization. We don't talk about, self-determination. We don't talk about these big topics that are important for liberation. When you want to preserve and protect the planet, you're not just doing it for animals, you're doing it for human beings. And so I'm a spokesperson for the Free West Papua campaign. And one of the visions that the indigenous people of West Papua has is the Green State vision. And I don't know if some of you guys here are gamers, but when you play a video game and you come to different levels, right? And you unlock a new level. And that's an achievement of itself. And then with that new level, you get new characters, you get new costumes, you get new settings, environments, and things to enjoy, right? That's the same principle that you can apply to liberation movements and indigenous struggles around the world. So by helping indigenous people with their decolonial struggles or with their fights for land or, water access or cultural preservation, you are unlocking new solutions. You are giving people new platforms to come forward with ways to fight this climate justice movement. And I will say it's not easy articulating all of this stuff, but I would like to see in the future more indigenous representation on climate justice panels, at festivals, at conferences. So I don't know if that answered the question, but yeah, I am passionate about indigenous knowledge in the climate justice space.
That definitely answered it. Thank you. Camilla, it'd be great to hear more about your work at the Natural History Museum. You mentioned how working there has reignited or livened the way that you respond to nature and feel about nature. So it'd be great to know what you do and also how you engage audiences and how they can take that same passion away.
So just for a tiny bit of context, hopefully most of you will be familiar with the Natural History Museum. We're a big old museum and with all the baggage that comes along with that, as you can imagine. We opened in 1881. We have about 300 to 350 scientists who are actually based at the museum, and they're looking after the collections. We have about 80 million specimens, and that is comprised of pretty much everything you can think of from the natural world, right? We have meteorites from Mars and the moon, we have dinosaurs, beetles, birds, mammals, pretty well everything you can think of. And in terms of my passion for the natural world, well, part of my job was about how can we raise awareness of the natural world, help create advocates for the planet. So I worked with our scientists to show people this is what we understand about how nature is today, how it was in the past, and how we can help protect it in the future. And working with people who are so passionate about all aspects of nature, honestly, it's impossible not to fall in love with our planet. It's completely astounding. So that's one part of it. A tiny bit of other context is in 2020 we launched a new strategy. I know what you're thinking, I'm just going to talk about organisation strategy. Most of these strategies are largely just, they're kind of boring. This one was amazing, and the whole museum really rallied behind it because it put the planetary emergency front and centre. So we said on no uncertain terms, we're facing a serious climate crisis, biodiversity breakdown, resource extraction, etc., displacement of people, of course, all these problems, right? We need urgent response, we need an urgent collective response, and it's no longer just about the science and the data, which will always be important to us. It's the backbone of who we are. We're a scientific organisation. But now it's obviously about how do we engage people, how do we move people, how do we connect with hearts and minds. You can't, in my opinion, you cannot do that with science and data alone. It's about so much more than that. So I've been working really hard with one or two of my colleagues to try and just start to shift the museum in a slightly different direction. So as I said, we always want to be talking about our scientific work. It's fundamental to who we are. But how are we going to start engaging people with taking action? So recently, only a few months ago, and I see Jasmine right here took part in this program, we ran a program called Generation Hope Act for the Planet, and it was a program for young people with young people. So we pulled together an advisory board of 3 Natural History Museum scientists and 7 youth activists from across the world. So from the Marshall Islands to the Philippines to India to Brazil, the US and Portugal. They really helped us shape that program. What should we be talking about? How can we really connect with people? So we ran a whole series of events. We ran panels just like this. We ran speed networking sessions so young people could meet activists, artists, those in the policy-making space, scientists, and really try and build a sense of community. And honestly, that word community has come up so much today. It comes up so much with the young people that we work with. And as an organisation, I would really love it if the Natural History Museum could focus some attention on how can we create a sense of community for people so they feel like they're contributing to something as a collective and they don't feel like they're working alone. I think that's how we tackle the planetary emergency, and that's what I'm trying to kind of keep encouraging the Natural History Museum to do. Yeah.
This is a really varied panel. I love it. Because you've mentioned community, I'll come to you next, Elliot. It'd be great to know a bit more about your work launching and with Football for Future. And I guess, what role do you think football plays and can play in this conversation about climate?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I'm probably going to try to take you guys on like my own sort of conceptual journey where we'll all sort of, if everything goes according to plan, arrive at the same place, which is in agreement that football is the most exciting cultural phenomenon with the greatest potential, seriously, to drive global climate action. So we need to build the biggest movement that the world has ever seen in order to tackle the biggest crisis that humanity has ever faced, right? That's why we're all here. And we need to create the biggest movement. What does that mean? To be participating in this movement means that you are in one way, shape or form, you're an activist, right? So then we can dig a little bit deeper and think about what does it mean to be an activist? And we've got a lot of activists here today, right? People look different, we move in different ways, we work in different ways as part of the movement, but also thinking about like our history and our experience working in activism. Like, it's a beautiful thing, like we get amazing communities, we experience a lot of magic when we are on the streets and we're dancing and sharing, etc. But also, if we all think back and like imagine some of the times when we've been in very challenging situations as being activists, right? Maybe we're camping on the streets, skipping school, taking time off work. Maybe we're receiving abuse or holding banners in the pouring rain or the freezing cold. I'm sure a lot of this resonates with you guys a lot. And I've been right there. And I used to wonder like why my mates and my family who understood the climate crisis weren't on the streets with me. You know what I mean? Like I know so many people that understand the extent of the climate and ecological emergency who were not partaking in protests and non-violent direct actions. And it kept me asking the same question over and over again about like how do you increase participation in the climate movement and what does it mean to be an activist? And I think I worked with Extinction Rebellion a lot, and people here would have worked with them too, and Fridays for Future, and these organisations achieved exceptional things in raising our national sort of like critical environmental consciousness. We got the many local governments and our national government to declare climate emergencies. Like this is like phenomenal stuff. We brought a community of people together that are now continuing to work together and take that work forward, not only in the UK but internationally as well. But I felt like there was this barrier between like breaking the echo chamber from there and increasing participation and increasing action. And then it got me reflecting on my own identity as an activist. And when I thought back, my first experience as an activist was actually going on demonstrations to get my club, who lost 6-1 today, Brighton and Hove Albion, planning permission when we didn't have a home. Right, our ownership sold our stadium. It got developed into a retail park, and we were sharing with Gillingham, and then we were playing at a local athletics track, which we were hiring off the local council. And I remember my dad taking me onto the streets, and we were marching, trying to get planning permission, and the rest is history. I'm going to Marseille next week to watch us in the Europa League. We've got a state-of-the-art stadium. But football fans are, great activists. A couple of years ago, some of you might recall when the European Super League was announced and all of the biggest brands in world football were being taken to this, out of domestic football. And fans woke up in the morning and they were marching and they were screaming and shouting and they had banners and placards and they were straight outside their stadiums. And I was like, wow, damn, like I'm super proud of the football community. Look at this, we're all activists. Super cool. And then I wanted to try and take this identity of being a football fan into the climate movement. So I remember going to demos, and one in particular, I wore an old Brighton shirt, and as I was leaving the door, I grabbed a pizza box, and on the back of it with a Sharpie, I wrote Brighton Fans for Climate Justice. And that weekend, I had so many middle-aged women coming up to me and being like, can I take your photo? Because, my son thinks he really, really loves football, but he doesn't think it's cool to care about the planet. And like, I'm not even joking, this happened more than 10 times, like independently, over and over again. And I was like there on the street thinking, wow, it's amazing how you can bring these two identities together. And I had a chat with a woman, a really inspirational woman called Gail Bradbrook, who's one of the founders of XR. And I told her about this, and she was like, yo, that's super cool. Why don't you just like set up a football group? So I set up a group called like XR Football or Football Rebellion, and I coordinated that for a year. And around this time, a report came out that mentioned that by 2050, 25% of professional football teams in men's English football, their stadiums will be flooded on an annual basis by 2050. And there was names like Chelsea, Southampton, Fulham, like loads of big clubs. So we did an action outside a bunch of Barclays branches, because at that time Barclays were the official banking partner of the Premier League, but they were also investing more money into fossil fuel projects than any other European company. So they were like simultaneously sponsoring the Premier League but sponsoring like the destruction of football. So we did these like pop-up games outside Barclays branches in London. And we had like one of the teams was like all corporates and shirts and stuff. It was kind of like theatre in a way. And the other team, we all had bibs, and we were like a proper football team. And the referee was a banker, you know, and like it was super corrupt. And the goalposts were moving. It was quite funny. But you know, my friends were coming down, and my dad came down. You know what I mean? So like, you know, when you bring football into it, all of a sudden, like my mates who would never come to a demo before, and my old man who would know, you know, he recycles a bit, but come on, you know, he was coming down. And I was like, yo, this is super cool. Super inspiring. We, you know, started getting into like national media. I remember we were in The Guardian, we was in the BBC. People like to talk about football. We're obsessed with it in this country. But then I started getting a couple of players reaching out, and I started getting a couple of clubs getting in touch, and I was like, wow, like I really want to work with these guys, but I can't do that as Extinction Rebellion, like there's no chance. You know, I got to be a bit realistic here. So I set up this like an independent non-profit called Football for Future. I went to the best graphic designer I know, and I said, yo, Tim, make me a logo for this. And I was like, I'll pay you £100. And he's like, I don't want the money, just take me along for the journey. And he's still like a good friend and co-founder now. But, you know, we always say at Football for Future, one of our slogans is, you know, nothing is more important than protecting the planet, and no social phenomenon is more powerful than football. Everyone in football, whether you're a broadcaster or a burger van, or whether you're a federation or you're a fan, everybody in this room, everybody in every sector of the world, no matter what you do, you have a unique position of power, a unique position of responsibility, unique skill sets, right? And in football, it's about how can you mobilize this, inspire people and empower people. And football's so unique because it's the most powerful social phenomenon in the world, and you can address this and approach that in different ways. It's this very unique connective tissue that brings people together across socioeconomic divides, nationalities, races, religions, genders, ages. You know, it's really, really amazing. It's super powerful. If we look at broadcasting stats, for the last 2 men's World Cups, in the finals, we had more than 3 billion people watching those. 3 billion people. And, you know, the game keeps on growing through women's football, but also geographically in different regions of the world. If you think about the most powerful media platforms that exist in the world today, it's not, you know, legacy media organizations like the BBC or the New York Times or Al Jazeera or any of that anymore. It's the social media accounts of these football players and these football brands. So a lot of potential. I mean, in terms of the cultural capital that exists in the game, it's like completely unparalleled. And if you think about it as well, I'm sure there are football fans in here. You know, in the last half an hour, I saw an Ajax shirt, I saw a United shirt, I saw a Wolves shirt, I saw an Arsenal shirt. It's like football fans are everywhere. But I can't remember, I just got distracted by telling a little anecdote. But obviously, like, the cultural capital is incredible. And how do we mobilize that? And there's loads of different, like, for good organizations that exist in football around, like, obviously Marcus Rashford with his Free School Meals campaign, like, unbelievable. You get policy change. Racial justice, all of these players taking a knee a couple of seasons ago, unbelievable. This is still happening today. They've created amazing noise and conversation around that. Gender equity in football, especially here in the UK at the moment with what's been going on with the Lionesses, is unbelievable. Lots of amazing conversations about gender equity, which spill from the pitch, but also outside, into just like all of these different spaces from pubs to playgrounds. And it's the same with LGBTQ plus conversations in football, but there was this like deafening silence around climate. It's like super interesting, like why did that exist? And to be able to mobilize climate in football, you need to be able to like dig beneath the surface and like try to understand what the relationship is between football and climate. So like, how does climate change impact football, right? How can you make climate change relatable to football fans? Like I said, 25% of stadiums in professional men's football in this country are predicted to be flooded on an annual basis by 2050. It's amazing, great stat. The last Men's World Cup, it was meant to take place in the summer in Qatar, and it got moved to the winter, and major tournaments are being rearranged now. The last African Cup of Nations was rearranged. It was meant to be in the summer in Cameroon. Cameroonian meteorologists recommended that it was played in the winter. The next African Cup of Nations in the Ivory Coast has already been moved because they expect strong monsoons. In the 2020 Japanese Olympics, in the final between the UK women and the Canadian team, kickoff was delayed by 9 hours because of like extreme humidity. But it's not just football anyway, it's all sports. But obviously I'm a football nut, so like my whole conversation is going to be focused on the beautiful game. But also you can look at, okay, so flip that the other way. How does football have an impact on the planet? And we can use the prism of like a match day analogy, right? Super relatable to billions of people around the world. We all go through the same process and rituals, right? So you wake up in the morning, you're putting on your shirt. How many shirts have been released this season? We all know the implications of fast fashion. How you get into the game. About 80%, between 60 and 80% of the football industry's carbon emissions come from transport. So how we travel into the games. Football has a big part to play in driving, climate action and sustainability around the world. And as we all know, travel is a really big part of that. What food is available at the stadiums? Are there vegetarian options or like plant-based options? What's it wrapped in, et cetera, et cetera? How are people consuming information as well? So really interesting. And then you can also start to pick out the most interesting and ambitious and progressive sustainability initiatives that already exist in football. Like Forest Green Rovers are an example of a professional club in this country that are certified as carbon zero, carbon neutral by FIFA and by the United Nations. But loads of teams in the Premier League now are recruiting sustainability managers. The Premier League have also got a sustainability manager. It's moving really, really quickly. The Bundesliga, which are the two top leagues in Germany, they're introducing mandatory club licensing criteria from a sustainability perspective, which is also really, really inspiring. And we're seeing more and more players using their platforms to speak up about this issue, which is super important because these guys are influencers on like another level. So my personal opinion is that look, environmental sustainability is one thing, but climate action is something that's completely different, right? If you've got a club and they're like bringing in like recycling and all this sort of stuff, that's great, but that's environmental sustainability. And it's not proportionate to the scale of the crisis that we're seeing. You know what I mean? Like if you're looking at football and it's like, oh yeah, can you audit yourselves and like, release a strategy that's going to show us how you can reach, zero carbon. We've already got catastrophic warming locked in, right? So if you're going to go carbon zero by 2050, it's not going to save the planet. It's not. If we look at the science, we look at the warming, we look at the ice caps melting, all of these different tipping points and feedback loops which we're going past. A sustainability strategy for a football club isn't going to save us, but football is unique because it is the most powerful social phenomenon in the world. I sound like a broken record. So how can football clubs, players, brands use their platforms to be able to drive radical worldwide awareness and attitude shifts around climate? Because they're not really doing it yet, but they can do, and it's going to start to happen. Over the last few years, we're seeing an exponential growth in the amount of players that are talking about this, brands talking about it, clubs talking about it, and we need to get away from this like, you got to be perfect to talk about climate or whatever. Like everybody knows that football's owned by billionaires, oligarchs, etc. you can only earn that much money through usually exploitation of people or through or exploitation of the natural world. They're not perfect, they're far from perfect, but they exist. Football exists, and we have to work with them and stop pointing fingers at them. And like, you know, if we're not gonna support and celebrate these guys trying to become better, then if football doesn't trailblaze a sustainability transition, I really don't know what else is going to be able to do that within the time frame that we need it to happen, to be perfectly honest. So yeah, I think it's around using the culture of football, the language of football, the values of football, teamwork, respect, belief, you know, like no hope is not lost until the final whistle blows. I think it's, you know, we've got a lot to learn from the game. Fans, you know, football fans, like traditionally we stereotype them, saying that they're thugs and they're hooligans. And yeah, that has been true in the past, but football fans are doctors, football fans are lawyers, football fans are really, really amazing people. They're farmers, they're parents, etc. And if we can work with the game in ways that not only is good for climate, but is good for the financial sustainability of the game, it increases participation and representation in the game, and it protects the future of the game, then we can approach this in a very intelligent and holistic way that's good for the planet, but also good for the sport. And, you know, I think I'll make two last points because I know I'm rambling on. The first one, what was the first one? I think it's about approaching it with authenticity. You know, don't approach football fans and be like, you know, as a consultancy and be like trying to like hijack the game or use it as a Trojan horse to like drive an agenda. They'll sniff you out straight away. Like if you understand football culture, then that's really, really important. But that also translates into different sectors, no matter what you're interested in. The other thing I will say is that, honestly, I swear to God, if Leicester can win the Premier League, we can avert the climate crisis like 100%, because that was impossible.
Okay, and last but not least, from one big global international industry to another one, can you talk to us a bit about music and your work with Climate Live, please, Bianca?
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of music and its power is really similar to football and its power. Like Ellie and I were talking earlier about how Climate Live and Football for Future have like kind of similar aims. So like music is one of the most influential like art forms that transgresses all cultures. It's like gone through history. It's been used as a tool of resistance as well. Like in the slave trade, people would sing songs, and even like now with artists like Kendrick Lamar, who is in the mainstream, like has won Grammys and all these amazing things by talking and singing about, rapping about like what it's like to be, for example, Black in America. Like these important topics can be talked about through music and reach people who wouldn't necessarily go to, say, a climate protest or a BLM protest for whatever reason. So yeah, Climate Live's aims are to try and mobilize particularly young people, but really all people who care about the climate, but wouldn't necessarily see themselves represented at a march or throwing paint at an oil painting or anything like that for whatever reason. We have a lot of teams in African countries and in the global south at large where Climate Live is kind of the only way that they feel safe doing climate activism because in their countries, going on a march, doing a demonstration outside a bank or whatever could literally get them killed by the authorities there. So yeah, I have a bunch of notes here, but honestly, a lot of what's been covered already is applicable to our organization as well. We're just a bunch of youth climate activists from different organizations who kind of got fed up of doing A to B marches, as effective as they have been over the years. We try and reach other people as well. Our biggest kind of events of the year have all kind of finished because festival season is over. However, we will be at COP28. There will be lots of things happening there. Everything's still up in the air, as it always is with COP, but just keep your eyes peeled for that.
I'd love to ask you all a question, which is any advice, actually, for people who are trying to get their message around the climate crisis or their environmental projects into the mainstream. And because you've all mentioned incredible projects, feel free to add on to the advice. It could be working with Football for Future or attending the Natural History Museum, but what advice would you give people really trying to get out into the mainstream?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. Obviously, the power of social media is unspeakable. Yeah, it's incredible. If you are a musician, then Climate Live next summer will be, as always, will be at festivals. We often use our big pink solar powered bus as a stage. We have a bunch of panels talking about climate, but to engage people who, again, wouldn't normally come to a panel. We have up and coming artists. We also have some not so up and coming artists. We had Jedward on the bus at Leeds Festival. So yeah, if you're a musician, you can speak to me or contact Climate Live UK on Instagram if you want to get involved.
I mean, it's hard to top social media, and I think the influencer space is very real. I mean, I think that really varies from culture to culture. There are some people we've worked with. There's an organization in China we worked with on a particular project, and they were saying over there, you know, if you get like a soap star taking a single action, like it's insane, like hundreds and thousands of young people will follow that action. I don't think it's quite the same over here. Maybe in football, I'm less aware. But yeah, that's kind of interesting. I would also, of course, say the Natural History Museum, do talk to me if you're interested in that kind of climate action space, whatever that action looks like. And I love that here today, I've heard several times it being discussed, like what are we talking about when we say activist and activism, because obviously I work for, we receive government funding, we're an arm's length body, otherwise we wouldn't exist. And so activist and activism can be kind of sketchy words with organisations like mine, but I would love it, again, if the museum could slightly just push at the boundaries of, isn't an activist just someone who is deeply concerned about the future of our planet and wants an equitable, habitable future and cares enough to want to do something? That's great. We can all be activists and not think that, I know, Just Stop Oil is a little bit divisive for some people. And okay, I can to some degree understand that. But you can be an activist and do something that makes sense for you, that resonates with your identity. And again, so I just love that those discussions have kind of been coming up today. And the other thing I love that's been coming up today is just, like I said before, not acting alone. Just, I think someone from the OVO Foundation, I think it was Tom, said if you're just kind of getting started and you're not sure, start small. There's nothing wrong with that. Just kind of get your teeth into something and do it with someone else. Like, do stuff together. Like, it's always daunting to do stuff alone. I just love that he reiterated that point. So I would definitely advocate for that as well. And yeah, we're looking to do much more of this kind of programming at the Natural History Museum. The science is key, but bringing in diverse voices, perspectives, sharing stories, creating spaces for emotion. So if you're in that space and you want to do that kind of work, then yeah, chat to me. That's what I'd say.
Joycelyn?
Yeah, I think I just want to echo what you said, that activism isn't one thing, and I think that activism is a verb, not a noun, so it isn't one, that it hasn't got one definition, and it's just how you decide to live out your values, and that can look like very different things. And I'd also like to maybe challenge how we think about the mainstream, because I think that often seems like a large scale thing, like how can we get every single person in the country for this one project. But I think that we need to think about the mainstream of our own individual lives and then the mainstream in our local communities. So you can start to get people excited about something in a community where someone in a village, halfway across the world doesn't even know about it, but it's the mainstream in that community and it's the mainstream that people are organising around. And that can look like lots of different things. And I think we have to sort of move away from this activist onlooker binary where it's like if you're not an XR or Just Stop Oil, then you're not an activist, because if we look at past activist movements and revolutions, it has been groups of people in local areas pushing the boundaries and being radical, really inspired by things that affect them, and activism is a necessity for them rather than a sort of passion project or hobby, which I feel like in the UK it sort of comes across as. So I think that we need to stop pointing the finger at people and really try and understand what gets them excited and what's really happening both globally but also close to home, and get that into the mainstream of, regardless of whether they're a full-time activist or whether they're a cook or whether they're a teacher, climate is in the mainstream of their mind or is the mainstream of their life and how they feel like they want to make an impact.
Elliot?
Really echo what Camilla said earlier on when she was talking around no data, no facts, no stats. So let's do some storytelling, make it as relatable as possible. That's how you engage people. And I think also try and use something other than just climate, talking about climate, try and use some other type of cultural phenomenon as the vehicle for that, because then it's going to be more targeted, and like you're going to be specific with your framing to particular groups that you're trying to influence and particular communities that you're trying to influence. And I'd say as well, like, you know, we suffer the consequences of our own imaginations. Like, shoot for the stars, like be super ambitious, and if you land on Mars, like you're still going to have a good time.
What a quote. And Kateka?
Okay, I think everyone, I want to challenge everyone in the room to, as a metaphor, like look inside your toolbox. Like everyone here has gifts and skills and talents and passions. And I think the common thread here is that we're like music is, is a passion, and football and everything. But just like be authentic to what you're passionate about. So like, for me, I like to dance, and I'm also a musician as well. So that's my kind of medium of expressing my frustrations and my joys and my highs and lows, right? And just like you were mentioning, like this idea of spheres of influence. While social media can be used to go viral and get hundreds, thousands, millions of views, just think about influencing your siblings, for example. I'm the eldest of 6, and I see, how I express my activism or how I pursue my passions is inspiring for my siblings alone. So think of activism as inspiring, being like an extension of your personal passions and letting that inspire your family, your friends, your community. Like you don't have to go viral for your action or for your contribution to the climate justice movement to be valid, or we're not trying to impress people, and we're trying to be authentic in our expression of activism. So yeah, look into your toolbox and let that be the base for which you pursue your activism, because I think that's sustainable and realistic. That's my answer.
Have we got time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience? 1 or 2. Anyone got any questions for anyone on the panel?
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for that. Amazing. Yeah, it's incredible. I think my question would be, obviously everyone has spoken to their individual passions, and again, we've spoken about individual power and that reflectivity. But what do you think unifies all your movements?
I mean, I think I interpreted the question as at the core, even though they present differently on the outside, what connects the kind of purpose. And I feel like it's care at the center of that. Everyone who does whatever type of activism, whether that looks like direct action or whether that looks like curation or science or storytelling, you wouldn't do it if you didn't care. And I think that's the part that we need to kind of capitalize on, is what makes people care, and the same thing doesn't make everyone care. And obviously through all of these different organizations, we're making people care based on those different trigger points. So that's what I'd say.
Can I follow on just from what Joyce is saying, because it's so true, and I kind of made this mention before, but say 2 to 3 years ago, there's just no way that the Natural History Museum would have been collaborating with youth activists. It just would have been considered risky, and it's just not something that we've historically and traditionally done. We've stuck to the science, and that's kind of how it is. But in working with some of the youth activists, and I've worked really closely with many of our scientists, it's so apparent that that's true. We're all fighting for the same future. We all want the same thing. It's just that we're operating and working in different spaces because maybe that's where our strengths have happened to fallen. We've worked within systems that have been kind of carved out for us, for sure. But this is kind of why we're trying to do what we're trying to do, right? Because not to oversimplify and overgeneralize, but of course the scientists, they understand the getting hold of that data and making that data kind of usable and accessible, and what does it tell us, and how can we then therefore use it in the best way. Some of the young people we've worked with, they are incredible in very different ways as well. Of course, they understand the data, but they show amazing leadership skills. They know how to organize. They know how to really connect with audiences. Now, some of our scientists know how to do that really well as well. But it's why wouldn't we be working together? We could be engaging with such a broader audience in a more meaningful way. It's a bit like collaborating with artists and creatives and storytellers, as I was speaking to some of our colleagues from the University of Exeter here today, you can engage a broader range of people in potentially a more meaningful way if you make things a bit more interdisciplinary, right? I think there's real potential there, and maybe that's something that feels relevant for all of us too.
Just going back to what Elliot and Joycelyn were saying about like it being really hard work, but we care. Like we all need to remember why we care, and that's why regeneration and like combating burnout is so important, because otherwise why would we be doing this? We're all going to die at some point, whether the planet does or not, you know. Why would we be putting ourselves through such harrowing work sometimes? But it's because we can, because we know that another world is possible, and because we deserve that. We don't deserve to be crumbling under this capitalistic system. We deserve to be able to exist and not have to be constantly just hustling all the time. And yeah.
I think I had a revelation. So I think one thing that unites all of us on this panel, and actually everyone in this whole event, is we have this desire to make information accessible. I think that's what it is. I think, you know, these new statistics around climate breakdown and disaster, like, it's overwhelming, and the majority of people aren't scientists or are able to really comprehend the gravitas of that, right? So through all our different mediums, we make all those big words accessible for our relative spheres and audiences and people. And yeah, it makes me emotional thinking about it. Like, we care so much about making sure people understand and feel, have the space to comprehend and digest. So I think accessibility is what we all cultivate our jobs and our groups and organizations around. I think that's my answer.
And I think we'll end on that note, so can we have a massive round of applause for all the panelists, please?